various criminal activities on the Tether platform. He said at some point software will solve that problem. Well, having been in the software sector, yeah, someday it might. But right now, I want to stop the amount of money laundering going through these organizations, and I would hope that he would commit to something much more aggressive than that. Lastly, I thought we had a pretty good answer in the Finance Committee to Mr. Bessent when asked about the same issues of Treasury settlements. You cannot have the United States, someone advocating that treasuries could get settled on a foreign exchange at a time when we can't even raise the debt ceiling, and then have them prioritize the debt away from the United States. I just can't accept his answer. So I hope that we will be proven wrong, but today my advice and consent is not to vote for Mr. Lutnick. I hope that, Mr. Chairman, we could come to some agreement in the future about FBI briefings. This is just not acceptable. In the past, the committee worked to try to give members as much as 7 days advance notice on the paperwork for both the OG paperwork and the FBI. I accommodated the committee with our Secretary of Transportation nominee and even helped move the hearing from 11 o'clock in the morning, which we didn't have the FBI paperwork, to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Somewhere that day we got the paperwork. Maybe you could think that that was a little less complex, that real world background isn't as interesting as Wall Street background. But nonetheless, yesterday at midday, faced with a briefing, not from the FBI, but from the White House, the counsel directly reporting to the President of the United States did the briefing. He told me that the FBI was just the ancillary collector of the information. I found that very interesting, challenging, tried to wrap my mind around it, but this hearing was already scheduled. So I hope that we can come to a future accommodation that we will at least give members 24 hours. I'd advocate for 7 days, but at least 24 hours before this FBI briefing process. Members have the information, they can communicate to our down dais members. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to turn to the bills at hand, and as I mentioned in my previous comments, I support this markup in 17 bills that are on here. 12 were advanced out of the committee in the last Congress, and 5 of those passed the Senate, so I hope we get them now through the House and all the way to the President's desk. And separately, 5 additional bills were negotiated with our House colleagues, which shows a great deal of bipartisan work from our colleagues and what they have done to try to move progress. I very much appreciate the S-99, Strengthening Support for American Manufacturers by Senators Peter and Blackburn. I very much support the Drives Act by Senator Fisher and Duckworth and Blackburn, the Promoting Resilient Supply Chain that I authored with our colleagues, Senator Blackburn and Blunt Rochester, because I think this is a very ripe issue for our committee to continue to focus on. I so much appreciate the support of the Tickets Act by Senator Schmidt and Markey, the Fire Ready Nation by Senator myself and Senator Sheehy. I look forward to working with him as the Pacific Northwest has been a pretty good, let's just say, I don't know whether Senator Sheehy agrees, but I think we probably have at least a 10-year run on everybody else already of dealing with this problem. So our ideas about technologies and solutions that have worked already that need to be expedited, I think we have a good viewpoint on that. And then the AM radio bill, Mr. Chairman, very much appreciate your and Senator Markey's continued push for this legislation. I represent a state prone to natural disasters. I don't know what to say, whether it's Mount St. Helens, whether it's the fires I just mentioned, unbelievable flooding given the big storms that we're hit with. And I like the notion that we are going to have good old-fashioned ham radio and car radios. I just think that we need to continue to have emergency response for people and think outside the box of how to skill that. Now, you think, well, that doesn't sound, well, go read the article that somebody wrote called The Big One. Is the big one going to hit the Pacific Northwest? Are we going to be at a point where we're going to be devastated from a grand implosion volcano experience that might just cause a lahar from Mount Rainier? The consequences are as devastating as some of the major events in the Louisiana and the South. So I hope that we will do something that thinks outside the box on how to keep communication going and not just respond to some of the requests by people that think that the digital solution is just the only solution. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, not on the agenda, but I hope that we will continue our focus on rail safety. I know the Vice President went to East Palestine, and I look forward to working with you on that issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Moran.
Mr. Chairman, thank you and Senator Cantwell for the expression of care and condolences for the victims of the flight that crashed here at Reagan National last Wednesday. Thank you to all the members of the Senate, including those on this committee who've expressed condolences to me and to Senator Marshall on behalf of our constituents in Kansas. And thank you for the leadership that both of you are and will provide as Senator Duckworth and I join you in efforts to determine facts and steps forward. I appreciate all the sentiments that have been expressed and the care and concern of my colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Moran. I now recognize Senator Thune for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that PN 11-9, the nomination of Howard Lutnick to be the Secretary of Commerce, be reported favorably.
Is there a second?
Second.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Thune?
Aye.
Mr. Wicker?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher? Aye. Mr. Moran?
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Aye.
Mrs. Blackburn? Mr. Young? Mr. Budd? Mr. Schmidt? Mr. Curtis? Mr. Moreno? Mr. Sheehy? Mrs. Capito? Ms. Lummis? Ms. Cantwell? Mrs. Klobuchar?
No.
Mr. Schatz? Mr. Markey? Mr. Peters? Ms. Baldwin? Ms. Duckworth? Ms. Rosen? Mr. Lujan? Mr. Hickenlooper?
No by proxy.
Mr. Fetterman?
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Kim? Ms. Blunt Rochester? Mr. Cruz?
Aye.
The ayes are 16. The noes are 12.
The motion is agreed to and the nomination is ordered to be reported favorably. I now recognize Ranking Member Cantwell for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that S281, the Ticket Act, as amended by Cantwell 1, as modified, be reported favorably.
Is there a second? Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Markey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate this committee hearing, and I appreciate the bipartisan nature of the markup and the bills that are moving. But it is difficult to sit here and hold a bipartisan markup when President Trump and Elon Musk and their team of government arsonists are blatantly violating the law by withholding federal funds, seizing control of critical government systems, and even proposing to eliminate whole agencies by executive fiat. Given the lawlessness reigning at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, why should we believe that the federal government will implement anything that Congress passes? It is more than a bit ridiculous that this committee is proceeding with business as usual in this climate. I filed Markey Amendment number 1 on my own legislation, the Ticket Act, to address an especially concerning abuse of government power. Over the weekend, Elon Musk and the Doge team physically seized control of a critical payment system at the Treasury Department, locked out the career employees, and proposed to start cutting off payments based on random tweets or messages. This takeover is at the heart of irresponsibility. Musk and his team now have access to sensitive personal information of millions of Americans, including their social security numbers and bank account information. They could shut off payments to Musk competitors, given his companies an unfair competitive advantage. And more likely, they will accidentally shut off payments that are critical for Americans to afford food, housing, and medicine. Marking number 1 would make it a violation of the Federal Trade Commission Act for the following individuals to access Treasury's central payment system. Number 1, a member of the public. Number 2, a career staffer who is also an executive officer or controlling shareholder of a company. Or 3, a political appointee who has not yet signed an ethics agreement. This amendment ensures that only individuals without a conflict of interest and who have a verified role in the federal government have access to these sensitive systems. Before last week, it might have seemed absurd to pass legislation to limit access to Treasury's payment systems, but Musk and his gang's recent actions demand an urgent legislative response to safeguard this critical financial infrastructure. My colleagues may argue that the Federal Trade Commission Act is a strange mechanism to block access to Treasury's payment system, but that access creates the type of privacy, cybersecurity, and competition risks that are at the heart of the Federal Trade Commission's mission and were the reason that Congress passed the Federal Trade Commission Act over a century ago. I believe that this is a critical amendment. I'm proud to partner on the AM Radio Act with you, but even if these bills pass, I have no confidence that this administration will implement the good work that this committee has done. So I urge my colleagues to stand up for our powers as the first branch of government, defend our legislative prerogative, and send a message to this administration that we will not roll over in the face of obstruction, coercion, and lawlessness. And I urge my colleagues to vote yes.
I thank my friend from Massachusetts, but nevertheless, I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. This amendment has nothing to do with the Ticket Act, and it is not within the jurisdiction of this committee. This amendment, unfortunately, is nothing more than a clear partisan political attack on Elon Musk, whom the president has tasked with running the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. In November, the American people resoundingly voted for President Trump. Naturally, President Trump is implementing the agenda that the American people voted for. Contrary to the Democrat opinion, there is no fourth branch of government known as the administrative state. No one elected the bureaucracy. DOGE is an office within the White House led by Elon Musk to eliminate wasteful government spending and to reduce unnecessary regulations. To fulfill its mission and review wasteful government spending, DOGE and its staff, including Elon Musk, must have access to data, including data in the federal payment system, to fulfill its mission requested by the president. And I would note that in just a matter of a couple of weeks, they've already found considerable waste, fraud, and abuse, in particular within USAID. Among the things they discovered that the previous administration was spending money on were $1.5 million for advancing DEI in Serbia's workplaces, $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala, $6 million for tourism in Egypt, paying for, quote, hundreds of thousands of meals that went to al-Qaeda-affiliated fighters in Syria, funds for the production of opium, the primary ingredient in heroin, in Afghanistan, which chiefly benefited the Taliban, $1 million to help disabled people in Tajikistan become, quote, climate leaders, $1 million to a Hamas-linked charity, and $15 million for contraceptives and condoms in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. You will forgive President Trump and the American people for thinking these expenditures are unnecessary and wasteful. And unfortunately, the hysterical doomsday scenarios of data tampering, privacy concerns, or payment delays or rerouting touted by Senate Democrats are false and were dispelled by the Department of Treasury last night in a letter that they sent to Ranking Member Wyden on the Senate Finance Committee. The The president is entitled to conduct full review of federal agency spending and regulations through the DOJ, and I intend to do everything I can to help ensure that its important mission is carried out. Litigating these partisan matters in this amendment or in this bill isn't appropriate. It's outside the committee's jurisdiction, and I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, thank you. I think this is within our jurisdiction because it deals with the FTC. So I very much appreciate Senator Markey raising this issue. When we worked on a privacy bill, we do not want the privacy of American citizens to be violated. We know that we have international adversaries who are also looking for this information and using it against us. That is why our own system has been hacked by them. So I want every precaution necessary to make sure that the privacy of U.S. citizens is guaranteed. So the notion that this process has taken place, I think, is unprecedented. What kind of personal data is at risk? Social security numbers, bank account information, home addresses, tax records. And so I hope that we will address this issue. I do plan to support Senator Markey's amendment. If you're interested in having a larger discussion in our committee, I'm not sure that this will stop within our committee. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a larger discussion. But I do think that we have to be on record of saying we are going to fight even the government's, the U.S. government's unlawful process of getting information from U.S. citizens. I will fight and continue to fight any administration that is somehow going to give an easy path to something that I believe needs to be defended. I think, and
Would the senator from Washington yield briefly?
I'm finished.
Thanks. There is no branch of the federal government called Elon Musk. Cutting waste and fraud is one thing, and this committee could do that, by the way. We could vote out wherever we see waste and fraud,